But I want to kind of go two directions. One, you talked about when you're doing some ENG work. You talked about what you did, a little bit of heavy maintenance, some light maintenance. I want to compare that to how you transitioned into HEMS and what that's been like. So maybe we can just start with what you did with the ENG stuff.
Yeah, so being at the finishing center, we were constantly doing refurbs. So we would take an aircraft that had outdated ENG equipment on it, whether it be the cameras, the navcom stuff, and maybe it needed a new paint job, new interior, whatever it may be. It would come home, we would completely rip it apart. We would usually, he's found the
The
squeaker
squeaker's
ball.
out.
I might have to move rooms really quick.
5 minutes later.
Good, Faith?
Yeah,
Now
I'm
your dog,
readjusted.
Is
now
he
the dog's
pissed?
gonna bark.
Yeah.
'cause-
I
Let
know.
me in.
Yeah, it's okay.
He's
Don't
so
worry about it.
needy.
It happens. Yeah. There's probably like 5 people listening to us, so don't worry about it. Just kidding. There's 10. There's 10.
Yeah, there's maybe
Yeah.
if we're lucky.
Of course, once Faith posted on her how to helicopter, there'll probably be a lot more. But yeah,
That's what we can get. So we were talking about ENG work, and you were talking about some of the equipment that you guys were swapping out.
Oh, so heavy maintenance. So at the finishing center in St. Louis, we would do all of the big refurbs. So constantly, we would pull a transmission, put it in another helicopter. We were actually also, I should mention, a repair station. So we overhauled all of our own components. So we would do something as big as to pull a 407 transmission out, do, the overhaul on it, and then reinstall it or put it in another aircraft that was, more of a push to get out the door. So we were constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul, or just, like running around like crazy in the hangar all the time. So we would have usually, I would say, 3 to 4 big projects going on at once.
Wow.
And our crew really wasn't that big for how much we were doing at that capacity or that level. Like I said, we had a whole paint department, so they would do paint schemes, all of that good stuff. We might do the inspections before it goes to paint, or get half of it done depending on what paint was going to do, because paint would actually even they'd repaint the deck. So we would repaint, like the oil cooler deck, or like underneath all of the drive shaft cowling, or the drive shaft segments. Sometimes all of that would have to be removed to paint. So they would just kind of see where it was at and if it needed it or not. But yeah, I mean, it was crazy. We had a guy that specialized in interior. So they would choose, are we going to do a corporate interior? Or are we going to do our standard interior? Depending on what it's going to be used for. So it was crazy all the time. And so then on top of be doing big projects like that, you might have a tail rotor gearbox that needed changed in Nashville. Or they'd call you and say, hey, the guy that was supposed to be doing the 12-month inspection in Miami is sick, or, whatever it may be. So it was very common to just get ripped off whatever you were doing. You'd go to another city for a couple days, come back, and the project would either be right where you left it, or 2 or 3 other people have already gotten it to the next step and they need your input on a couple things. So it was crazy. But like I said, it was really, really good experience because I learned a lot really fast. And so that was something too, coming to the EMS world. When I got to one helicopter, I told the guys that were hiring me on, I said, listen, there's some stuff it will shock you that I know how to do. And there is some stuff it'll shock you that I don't know how to do. Because some of the most routine, basic stuff, that was little piddly stuff. I wasn't messing with that. So they were like, no, this is great. They said there's a lot of people that are in the field that, might get nervous to do something for the first time because they haven't done it, or it's an inspection that doesn't come up very often, but you should know how to do it. And I said, yeah. So, a good example is the tail rotor push control tube. So in the tail of a Jet Ranger or a Long Ranger or 407, there's a very, very, very long control tube. I forget how many feet long it is. And every 1,200 hours, I believe it is, I have to look in the manual, but you're supposed to take that out and you're supposed to check the bearings on each end. So, a lot of people, sometimes even in their career with their helicopter may never even end up doing that. You know, it'll get sent to a bigger finishing facility. They'll take care of that. But really, it's a pretty routine, easy check. So, you know, it just really depends on what the mechanic is comfortable doing here. And at first, I kind of thought when I went to the EMS world, because my base is in the middle of nowhere, I really thought I was going to be in no man's land. And like, if I need help, I have to shoot up a flare and send smoke signals. It's going to take a couple business days for someone to get to me, but it's really not like that. So if there's anything at all that they think that, you know, should require two people, they have it in their, you know, manuals, I guess in the company's manuals, that says, okay, if you do anything related to A, B, or C, there has to be a second mechanic, not a pilot to look it over, a mechanic. And the pilot's going to look it over too. So some of the stuff I feel comfortable doing by myself, I actually still can't do by myself because they want that second and third set of eyes, which I think is awesome that they've put that in place because it's a safety thing. But pretty much just to give everybody the warm and fuzzies and make sure, hey, we are doing what we say we're doing by the book, and it does look good to three people. So, so that's been cool. Like I said, at first I was a little nervous because I was like, man, what if something comes up and I don't know how to handle it? Like, how is this going to work? And they're like, nah, they're like, it's not a big deal. So now it's funny because I've been at my base for a couple months now. And at first I think they didn't want to call me because they're like, well, she's young and she's new. Like, we don't want to bother her. We want her to get kind of settled in before we start calling her out to other places. And then they figured out, they actually acquired a 407, which in my region, there's not many 407s. And I used to work on 407s a lot. And so they called me over one time for a quick FADEC question, like a refault, you know, set light. And so I went over there and did it real quick, showed them what it was, why it tripped up. And they're like, hey, do you know anything about this or this or this? So I was like, yeah. And so like, can we like use you? Can we call you whenever we have the stuff come up? I'm like, yeah, as long as you schedule it, let me know. I said, unscheduled, I got to work around my bird too. But, you know, if I can, I'll definitely come over here to help. So I take care of my bird and I unofficially take care of another one too.
That's
so
cool. Samantha, one of our previous guests, talked about as a pilot, you can have, you know, a couple thousand hours of flight time, you know, doing the same thing a couple thousand times, and it really doesn't make a difference. Or you can have 500 hours of experience doing all kinds of different things. And it sounds like it's what you're describing. You know, you learned a lot, got a lot of experience in a short amount of time, and you've now been able to employ that in this new mission set, which is really cool. With the mission set, though, I'm curious, you know, from your perspective, I know, you know, working on an HEMS aircraft is really no different mechanically than working on an ENG aircraft. But does the mission set, is it all inspiring, the fact that you've got this, you know, different mission set that you're working on?
Oh yeah, 100%. I never, you know, working for an ENG company, the flights that we went on, the pilots went on were very routine. So, you know, like the guys in Cleveland, they went up every day for the morning show and the evening show, and they were on standby for breaking news. So that might be their day. I know the guys in Detroit, they always do an evening show. They usually don't do a morning show. So these guys are pretty routine and they know when they're going to go up unless there's breaking news. And some of the places require them to be at the hangar all day. And some of them require, you know, just to be near it in the sense of like 20 minutes or so out so they can get there in time. But yeah, EMS has been totally different. You know, I see these guys go out, they come back and I hear them talking about, you know, the patient that they just saved or the kid that they were just working on, and they check up too. Like, it's crazy to me how much they're constantly calling the hospital to make sure that like those people are okay or they're getting the care that they needed. And it really hit home it was probably a month ago. I went to the base and there's constantly people in and out. You know, some people that do like, they'll come by and they're like, oh, I cut the grass, or, oh, I fill, you know, the fuel, or I do whatever. So there's people that are always in and out of there that I'm not familiar with. And we always have workover pilots too, because my base actually is in need of one pilot slot. So they have people come in to kind of fill in. So this gentleman came in the door of, you know, the living quarters. And he's like, hey, who was on shift last Tuesday? And he had something in his hand. I thought it was a bill or a receipt. And I was like,
Wasn't me.
I was like, oh, do you need like my program director or something? Like, I can give you a phone number, and he's like, No. He's like, he was real old. He was kind of shaky. He's like, I just need whoever was here on shift last Tuesday because I would not be standing here if it was not for them. And I was like, oh, that was new to me. I was like, oh, okay. Hold on. I'm like scrambling. So I go in the kitchen, the crew's like making their breakfast, biscuits and gravy. And I'm like, hey, someone's here named Doug. And they're like, oh, Doug. They're like, oh, yeah. And they all like go out there and they're like, hey, how are you? And, and he's like, this poor old man about had me in tears. He's like, oh, you guys are just fantastic. He's like, my wife and I, we want to donate and do all this stuff. He was just super, super, thankful. And then he was like, they asked him, they said, hey, do you want to see the helicopter you got to take a ride in? He's like, yeah, I don't remember any of it. He goes, that was the most expensive helicopter ride of my life, and I don't even remember it. It was giving him so much trouble. So he went out there and checked it out, and he took a picture with the crew, and it was this whole thing. And I'm like, man, that's actually pretty cool. So that was kind of the first time it kind of, hit home, like the work that they're doing. Cause I don't see that, occasionally I might hear about it, and it's really, really rare that they ever have a, patient delivered to base or they come back to base. It's only happened once or twice since I've been there, and I, wasn't involved. I maybe just fueled them or something and they were on their way. So, but yeah, that was really cool to see. Like I said, that hit home. I remember coming home and I called my dad and I was like, that was crazy. Like that was really, really sad. Like not sad, but like it was a bittersweet feeling, but it was really cool to see.
I think that's one of the neat things about the HEMS industry is there's so much positive feedback that comes back. A friend of ours, Jeff and ours, he also worked for an EMS HEMS company, the same company you guys work for. The family came back. It was a pretty emotional post. Sounds like they had lost a son, but while that was sad, it was really it speaks to the impact that you have in people's lives in a positive way. So just basically the post was the mom, I think, thanking the crew and talking about how impactful they were. And I don't know, Jeff, if you want to speak to your experience on that, because in law enforcement, we don't always have the luxury of getting positive feedback. The only feedback we get is from our folks on the ground when we lose somebody on the camera or whatever, and that's negative.
Right.
So we don't get the families come back to thank us for whatever took place.
It's like being like an abused child when you're in law enforcement. But yeah, man, it's I've had almost a very similar experience to what you related, Faith, with we were sitting at the base one day and knock on the door, and a gentleman comes to the door, an elderly man, and he's pretty emotional, and he says, y'all saved my life. And he said, you flew me, and it was like a year. It had been like a year. And of course I have my schedule in my phone, I can look at my calendar. And so he was like, who was flying on this day? And so I scrolled back through my phone, and it was me and the nurse that I was working with that day. And I was like, actually, it was the two of us, and he was, just in tears, emotional about saving his life. And, tends to, the day to day, it tends, they all kind of blend together after a while. You remember certain ones, a sheriff's deputy that was in a car wreck, and of course, having been a cop, of course I remember that one. And we flew him to the hospital, and I was like, normally on the flights, I don't really pay that much attention to or look up, try to find information on, but that one stuck with me because, I'd only been on the job for about a year, and he was a sheriff's deputy that was hit in a car wreck, and he was in bad shape, and we got him to Vanderbilt Hospital. And finally found someone that posted something about it on the internet, sent her a message, and next thing you know, I'm in contact with his mom, and I'm friends with her on Facebook, and in contact with her. I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he's back on the road and working. And those, and I haven't had a chance to meet him yet, but I've had a chance to meet his mom. And I actually took one of my Riverside PD Air Unit coins when we landed at the hospital. I keep it in my pocket of my flight suit as like a good luck charm. And I opened my door, and I told the nurse, I said, hey, take this coin and leave it with him. He needs it more than I do right now. And, he was combative. He had a brain injury. they got him inside the hospital, and they put the coin inside of his wallet. And I was like, man, somebody's going to find it, his mom, his family, him, and be like, where the hell did this come from? This Riverside Police Air Support Unit coin. And so I reached out to his mom and I said, when you get his stuff, you'll probably find this coin in there. And I just want you to know why it's there. And, that I'm former law enforcement pilot. And I, felt like he needed that good luck more than I did that day. And so, yeah, we've been friends ever since. And yeah, it's pretty, especially like where you work, Faith, is a very rural area. Where I work is a very rural area. So pretty much everybody's been touched by the EMS helicopters, because what you would think in Southern California would never get flown by a helicopter, it gets flown by us because we're so far away from a higher level of care and trauma centers and stuff like that. So, you'll go to the gas station, and if you're in your flight suit putting gas in your truck or car, whatever you drive, I guess, but not my old Chevy truck, but if you go to the gas station, somebody's going to see that and they're going to be like, oh, you fly for air evac, oh, you flew my cousin, you flew my Meemaw, you're going to find somebody that's you've flown somebody that is related to them. And that's a really special, I think, relationship that you have in that community. Again, going from being a cop where, you weren't everybody's favorite necessarily, even the air unit guys, we were pretty cool. People liked us, I think, so for the most part, because we weren't out there writing tickets and arresting people necessarily. But going to the EMS side of it, where, it's like being a fireman, man, everybody, loves you when you show up. It's a different, it's really a cool thing. And then to be in a small community, where, you're really a part of the fabric of that community. And you've done a lot of, your company, your organization has done a lot of good work for just really good people. Yeah, it hits different for sure.